Okay. All right. Well, thank you to Ollie and Katrine for this invitation. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I am very happy to talk about it to anyone who wants to talk about it, right? So, as I said, as Katrine said, my nickname is Dr. Boo, so feel free to call me Dr. Boo, whether here or anytime you see me, anytime. So I answer more quickly to Dr. Boo than I do to Cynthia. So I'm a retired professor from the University of Texas, and I am an academic research fellow at MIT's Center for Information Systems Research, which is a research community, research or part of the Sloan School of Management. So my career has kind of been in three parts. I had about 20 years to working as a practitioner, as a programmer, as a manager, consultant, sort of early technology. Then I had about 20 years as a pure academic doing, teaching and grading and writing research papers and crying and writing more research papers. And then for the last 20 years or so, I have been associated with the Center for Information Systems Research, where basically what we do is try to help our 100 or so sponsors get better value out of their technology by writing long and short pieces to help them, and also writing articles that we publish in practitioner outlets. And we also occasionally publish academic articles as well based on our research. So when I was an academic, I published one book actually for practitioners to getting off to a good start. And then 21 articles in academic journals, including 6 in MISQ, when it was easier to publish in MISQ, and 1 in ISR. And then over my career, I've published 18 articles in practitioner outlets, with 7 of those in Sloan Management Review and 1 in HBR and 3 in MISQ Executive, right? And when I was an academic, I published 11 conference papers, mostly at ISIS, that you think of those as kind of like baby papers, that are going to be turned into complete academic articles. On the practitioner side, at Scissor, we write something called briefings, which are 3-page summaries of an idea, and they often turn into practitioner articles. And I've written 40 of those. So I actually have more publications. I have 2 more books that I've published in recent years, one last year, that are written essentially for practitioners. So I have struggled with this idea of taking research and that I do sort of from an academic perspective and publishing it in practitioner research, practitioner outlets for my entire career. So this has been something that I have struggled with, and that I think I understand better today. Okay, so any questions about that? Not so far. Okay, if you have questions, you can just speak up, and I believe your screen will move to the top so that we can see you. You don't have to turn your video on if you don't want to, or you can put a question in chat, and Ollie's going to follow that for me and interrupt me and tell me there's something in chat, or you can raise your hand and you'll come up to the top and I'll see you. Okay. All right. Okay. So moving along. So what I wanted to do in this time is actually just spend a short period of time, or maybe a longer period of time if you have questions, talking about sort of 3 concepts that, or maybe it's 4 concepts, but anyway, a few concepts that I want you to understand in order to answer your questions. So you submitted about 10 questions, and I'm going to address those after I go through these concepts. I'm going to answer them, and I hope within the context of what I'm telling you, so that I think they will be more clear if I do that. Is that okay? Everybody's okay with that? Okay, see if I can get this moved around a little bit. Okay, so first concept is the concept of the conversation, right? So what is an article? So an article, whether it's for an academic outlet or a practitioner outlet, is a contribution to a conversation. So imagine that you're at a cocktail party and you walk up and everyone is talking about AI, right? And you know something from your research and you want to break into that conversation, right? So that's essentially what you're doing with an article. Academics are having a conversation about some theoretical issues. Practitioners are having a conversation about issues surrounding practice. And essentially, you have an idea. We call that idea an aha. This the this little guy is the symbol of for the aha, the idea, right? The light bulb. So you have an aha and you want to interject that aha into that conversation, right? Everybody got the aha idea? Let's see some nodding. Okay. So it's a convention. It's a convention, but nevertheless, it is a widely held convention that an article, academic or practitioner, can't just be an idea. It also has to have actionable implications, right? But that we call that the so what. So what? Okay, yeah, your idea, but so what, right? So this down here is the little symbol for the so what, right? It's a little man running along, action. He's actually moving, he's doing stuff. He's not just thinking, okay? So in research articles, those actionable implications are implications for research, right? How you want researchers to behave differently. And in practice, those so what is what do you want the practitioner to do when they set your article down and they find themselves in the office on Monday morning and they have to take some action based on this brilliant new idea that you have shared with them. Does that make sense? Yeah? 2 little nods, 3 little nods. Okay. Okay. All right. So you got the idea. Article is a you're breaking into a conversation and you have an idea, but you are obligated to also explain the so what. You are obligated to explain what the implications for research or implications for practice are, depending upon which one of these, right? Okay. All right. Nope, not going to happen. Please. Okay, somebody help me. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. Actionable implications. What the hell does that mean, right? Okay. Actionable implications. The important part of this is not the word implications, but action. That's why the little man is running, right? So what we're talking about when we're talking about actionable implications, we call it changes to practices. Now, we use the word practice in a more general way than the researchers that focus on practice-based research, right? Practice-based research is just mostly focusing on tasks and looking at the use of technology within a task. But here we use the word practice to mean all of the things, to kind of refer to all of the dials and levers that practitioners can actually manipulate or operate, right? So if you ask the so what question is asking, so what should I do on Monday morning after I have put down your article? Do you remember that? Okay, so what managers can do is operate certain dials and levers, right? They can change performance metrics or add new performance metrics. They can change policies or add new policies, get rid of old policies. They can change procedures, how people operate, or whether or not those are automated, right? They can change rules, like rules of behavior, business rules, right? They can reallocate resources. They can train or shift training. They can hire and fire, buy, acquire and sell, organize, reassign, create new groups of people, initiate experiments. Those are things that managers can do. Does anybody have any questions about that? Thomas, ask a question.
Dr. Beath.
Get the ball roll. Okay.
All right.
I will
very
soon.
I have a question.
Okay. Yes, please.
So just to kind of, I mean, I know the answer perhaps, but still, just so that we make it interesting. So the question is, we don't refer to managers only. Here, it could be a policymaker, it could be a politician who's waking up Monday morning as well, I assume.
Yes. Yes, and actually, it could be the do you remember we talked about a conversation and we talked about articles, we're talking about practitioner journals, the readers for Sloan Management Review and California Management Review and HBR, those are mostly mid to senior level managers. And the journals want to give you the impression that those journals are being read by the senior executives, even though like the market at the senior executive level is probably not enough to keep them in business, right? So, but they want to create the illusion that their work is for senior executives, even though like people like at my level, when 40 years ago, are reading HBR to find out what the new ideas are. And, so the market for HBR goes down to a very low level manager, right? A low level consultant, a baby consultant reads HBR, right? But the language of the article tends to skew upward, right? To executives and senior managers. But that's a convention for it because they have to make money, right? Right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was also curious to know any of these practitioner journals also spoke to politicians, for example, or other, not
Yes.
really a commercial entity and managers within those entities, but also political
Yes.
groups or the governments, for
Yeah.
example.
Yes. Actually, I'm sure there are. I don't know what they are, but I'm sure they are. And I have colleagues who know who they are, what they are. So John King and Dick Mason could answer that question for you much better. I don't, I don't, I don't pay attention to that community. I don't know a lot of people in that community, so I have not had the opportunity to ask them, as you will, what do you read, right? They read, probably many of them read The Economist. There are many outlets that practitioners read that are primarily written by journalists, but that do sometimes publish editorials by academics and consultants, right? So The Economist would be probably a key outlet for many political leaders, right? But there are, I think there's something called Public Administration, which is a journal that kind of bridges the schools of public administration and their communities, which are the lawmakers, regulators, that kind of stuff. So, but this is, you need to find out what is the conversation that those people are having, where do they read, what do they read, where do you want to publish, if that's the kind of work you're doing, right? When I say policies here, I'm thinking about internal company policies, like no cloud or all cloud. That's a policy, right? It's maybe not written in stone, everyone understands it. Or that we don't hire people from X, or that we outsource as much as we can. Those are what I'm thinking about, policies that our research may have implications for. Okay. Any other questions about this? Can you all envision, you can envision what practices are, what people would do if they read an article based on the stuff that you study, what they would do differently?
I just wondered whether we should probably address many of those aspects, so performance metrics and policies and procedures and so on, or whether we should focus on one or two of them. Actually,
in my experience, more than one, because they go together, right? So one of my favorites, everybody has favorites. One of my favorites is put somebody in charge of this, right? So that would be reorganizing or reassigning, right? Put somebody in charge of this. No one is paying attention to this, and it's important, right? Number two, begin measuring things, right? That would be performance metrics. Another one would be create a team, fund a team to do some initial work or some trial work to see if this idea works for you. That would kind of be in the resource allocation family, right? So I have favorite combinations. Thomas.
Yes, for sure. Thanks for sharing, first of all. I think it's always a great presentation listening to you. But I
My
just
pleasure.
wonder if there is if there is an implication on the study design, on the research design, if you want to study practices. I mean, you always do also for the theoretical paper, right? But does it require a different study design if you go for practitioner article?
Probably. Yes. So I'm going to talk about this more later, but
okay.
just because this is kind of, we're focusing here on what we're going to say at the end of the article about what they should do. It's really important to have some knowledge about what they do and where are they on, what are common policies in this area? What are the most common KPIs or performance metrics in this area? So yes, I would say, and if you're going to write an article about practice, when you're doing your field work, you should be making sure you're familiar with these things. And also, it's extremely helpful to talk to managers about the degree of discretion they feel like they have in making changes to some of these things, because ultimately, what you're trying to do is influence practice. You need to understand what practitioners feel like they can do, right? If you're going to write an article at some point that says your organization should completely change its policy about outsourcing, right? You should insource as much technical skill as you can have. You really need to understand, how do organizations go about making that kind of change? Who has to get involved? What considerations are made? It's like you have to have an appreciation for how that kind of transition takes place in order to write. What I'm talking about is like a page or a page of ideas about how to put your idea into practice, right? So yes, I would say, if not part of your research plan, then part of your post-research plan is to familiarize yourself with how implications work out, right? What kind of actions people can take.
Thanks.
Other questions about this?
I just had a small question
Yes.
regarding the conversation in these types of outlets, because in the outlets that I'm used to or familiar with, when I publish an article and the community disagrees with it or doesn't resonate with it, I would later see another article saying, "Hey, this is not right. We should talk about it in a different light." Would that happen in practitioner outlets? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. It's exactly the same thing.
Okay.
It's exactly the same thing. And you do see your academic articles as contributing to a conversation. That's really easy to see, don't you think? You know who the community is. You know them personally, right? Or by name, right? Yeah. So actually the same thing is going on the other side as well, right?
Also
and the more you know
practitioners?
about, yes. Oh yes, they're all talking to each other. One of the purposes that the Center for Information Systems Research has is to allow them to talk to each other, right? So we see them talking to each other all the time, right? And they join in order to talk to each other. They want to talk to each other. So they're having these conversations, right?
Very cool. Thank you.
So yeah, it's good thing to keep in mind. Okay. All right. What are not practices? Now, this is my personal opinion. This is a bone that I have to pick. You have to be subjected to it, you poor things. So anyway, what are not practices? What are not actionable implications? Anything that's inside of a manager's head, right, is not an actionable. It may lead to action, but it's not actually by itself actionable. So articles, if you submit an article to Sloan Management Review or HBR and you say, the point here is to understand what I'm saying and to realize that it's important to you and to think about it and to recognize this or that, that's not an actionable conclusion. And they will send it back to you and say, give us more actionable conclusions. If they like your idea, they'll keep it, right? But things that happen in like lessons learned, all of that kind of cognitive stuff is not really an actionable conclusion. And I urge you to push towards actionable conclusions. These kinds of things are really part of your ahas. They're really just another way of thinking about your aha or presenting it. It's not a so what. It's not an actionable conclusion. When I was working on this slide, my husband came in and he said, oh, I see the point you're trying to make is don't put that light bulb up at that guy's butt, especially not a light bulb that big. So that will help you remember the difference between the light bulb and the little man, right? Okay. So, okay, next big concept. The concept of the Ouroboros. This is a symbol that is common in virtually every culture on the planet, and it refers to both the idea of unity and creative destruction, right? So articles, in addition to being part of a conversation, have to have these characteristics of unity and creative destruction, right? And you have the elements in the aha and the so what. You've got two of the elements of this creative destruction. So let me explain what I mean. So unity, we're going to use unity to get to creative destruction. Okay. By unity, this is the little snake over here, right over here. Unity means that there's a single thread of logic linking all the bones of the article. Now, I've just done 3 bones here, but of course, articles have like 10 bones, right? Academic articles or practitioner articles, even a newspaper article, same bones, right? All right, the first thing, the beginning of the article is the problem statement. That's the old behavior, right? Gray means old, right? Old behavior, the problem statement, the old behavior that's not working, that is problematic, that clearly somehow or another has to be changed. And then the light bulb is the new idea. And at the end, it's what to do next to solve the problem. That's the actionable implications over there, right? So problem statement, new idea, and what to do next to solve the problem, right? And that's what we mean by creative destruction. This is creative, and this is destroying this. Make sense? I get a thumbs up someplace, a nod. Everybody's on board with that? Okay. So it's the unity principle is one that we address in academic articles all the time, single unit of analysis, same level. In practitioner articles, you don't want to lose track of that same thing. You don't want to start with one problem and end up with a different solution, right? You want things to be in the same domain, at the same sort of level of analysis. If you're talking about what project teams should be doing, then the bulk of your so what should probably be about what project leaders or people that own project leaders should be doing to help projects work better, right? If you're talking about organizations, your so what's should probably be at the organizational level. So you want you have that same kind of, you want the bones to all link together. Is that a familiar concept to you, that in academic articles, you want to be very careful about the bones all? It's not that all the pieces have to be present. It's that they have to actually link together, right? They have to actually make sense as a group, right? Like a nice spine. Nice spine has to make sense as a group. Okay? No questions? Okay, so I'm going to say, so you're very familiar with this. I'm just going to make this a little bit more specific. So more bones, right? So you have the motivation in an academic article and the theoretical and existing knowledge, all of that is kind of the old idea, the gray idea. Then the new idea, new hypotheses, new evidence, limitations to generalization, new knowledge, all of that is the idea. You're expressing and describing the idea. And then what researchers should do next is the little actionable conclusions, but for researchers, right? So my point here is that, what is my point here? I don't remember. Okay, all right. Anyway, so you understand that these 3 things. I had something I wanted to say. I don't remember what it was. Let me see if I can get it back. Oh, I know what it was. You know that in an academic article, the motivation is fairly short. literature might be longer, right? But that all sort of sets up the motivation for the article and shows what a domain is, what you're talking about, what you're not, what your dependent and independent variables are going to be. That's maybe a third of the article. And then almost 2/3 of it will be the idea itself. And what researchers should be next is actually a small part, right? The same thing is true with practitioner articles. You know, how you set it up, what the practical problem is, and what we know so far, even smaller, maybe a quarter. Most of the article will be about the new idea, understanding what the new idea is, practical supporting evidence or illustrations of the new idea, how the idea actually materializes. And then the last thing, what practitioners should do differently, the so what, that's actually a small part of the article too, right? In a 3-page briefing, for us, it's like one long paragraph, maybe 2 short paragraphs. In a HBR article, it's the last section, and it's maybe 10% of the total weight of the article. In Sloan Management Review, same thing. It might be of a 10-page submission, it might just be a page or a page and a half, right? But it's the way of translating your idea into practice, and it's an illustration of how your idea may be put into practice. Your idea may be put into practice in different ways in different organizations. And I have a colleague who argues that if you just give a practitioner a great idea, they'll take the ball and run with it, right? And that may be true, but the convention still remains at the practitioner journals that you will demonstrate your understanding of how this idea can be applied by exhibiting one example or talking about the so what, right? Okay. Anybody have, so it's creative destruction, you know, it's this is destroying this, little black guy is destroying little gray person, and here's the creativity. The creativity is in the light. Oh, okay, Thomas, thank you.
No, just a short question. I'm just wondering, like, do you think of the practitioner and the academic article belonging together as one piece? Because I think what we see is that in a lot of practitioner articles, people first write the academic articles, right? And then afterwards write the practice articles. Or do you think you can also just start by writing the practice article?
I think you can start by writing the practice article, actually. The advantage of getting the academic article written first is that usually the editorial process refines the presentation and the language even of the idea, of the aha, right? The aha gets strengthened in that process, right? If what the academic process is doing is strengthening the opening and closing parts, those are useless, right? So once you think the idea sort of well worked out, then I think you're ready to write a practitioner article, right? You don't want an idea expressed one way in a practitioner article and a completely different way in an academic article because it's 3 years later and I really understand my idea, right? So you don't want to be in that position. But on the other hand, academic articles take forever, right? And a lot of the last year is just waiting in line to be published. And a lot of the next to the last year is just refining tiny things in the analysis and proving this or that. I mean, it's like completely irrelevant to the core idea. So waiting 4 years to get the academic article published, or 6 years, to take your idea to practice is folly, because by that time practice has moved on, right? So you want it to be fresh. So I think you have to find the timing in those two things. You know, is the idea well worked out? Am I using the language that I'm going to want to use in the long run here? You know, and if that's pretty stable, okay, now I'm ready to write the practitioner article version. And actually, I do think of them. So in my experience, I do think of them as paired. Like, I am interested, I'm trained as a researcher, and I'm interested in theory and sort of researcher kinds of problems. How do you articulate this? Which factors are more influential than other factors? Which contexts does this idea work in? And in what context does this idea not work, right? I'm interested in those kinds of issues. I'm just more interested in the practitioner side. Like, how can I help somebody run their IT organization better and more productively and more effectively and more efficiently, right? So I tend to, but I still think like a researcher. Okay, any other questions about that? Okay, all right, moving along. So just to kind of reiterate, I probably don't need to do this. There's a creative, and the creative part is the idea. There's a creative part, and there's a destruction, and the little running man, the little black running man, is the destruction part of it, right? Okay, and it's the same in both situations. Okay, projects versus articles, Thomas, this gets to your thing. So they are different, right? But you know what the differences are now, right? They start in different places and they end in different places, but in the middle, they may be very similar, right? You don't have to have them. But when you do this, and this gets to your point too, Thomas, when you're doing your research project, you should be thinking, I think, you should be thinking about how does this work in practice? So even when you're starting, before you start collecting data, read in the research, in the practitioner literature a little bit to see how are practitioners discussing this. This is extremely helpful if you're asking questions. You need to put things in their language, not in our language, right? If you're going to ask questions in an interview or ask questions in a survey, your language should be reflective of their language, not our language, right? And does that make sense? That makes sense, doesn't it? So yeah, so I think that if you want to have influence in both of these fields, you have to be aware of them, right? Okay, all right. No questions. Okay, so advice section. So you asked some questions. Let me see if I can find them. So let me tackle the questions that you submitted earlier, and I'll answer those, and then we'll see what other questions you have, right? Okay, so the first question was how to convert a theoretical idea into a practitioner outlet. Okay, so I think you know the answer to this now, right? The idea may not need much conversion, right? The idea is the idea. It may need to be expressed in practitioner language rather than in theoretical language. You may be talking about practices rather than capabilities, right? But you're basically reframing it by putting it in a different beginning and ending, right? A different motivation and a different so what, right? That's what you're doing, right? So the aha doesn't need to be changed much. And in fact, I would not worry too much about rephrasing the aha so that it's more so it's more palatable. It's not simpler to read and things like that, right? That's not the point. Editors, the journals, these good ones have editors and they will help you. In fact, they will drive you crazy with their help. But so that the language problem is way less of a problem than you might think, right? But you just have to, the idea has to contribute to a different conversation, and it has to have those so what implications to validate the idea, right? Okay. Second question was how to publish an HBR. And it's just like publishing anywhere else. You have to understand where they're coming from and what their business model is, and how, so you have to understand that journal, and then you have to submit. And it's probably 99% of the effort is in submitting, and 1% of the effort is in understanding the journal, right? But you submit and you listen to their feedback, and then you submit again and you listen to their feedback. So it's really not any different. I asked you, in terms of pre-reading, I suggested that you look at the advice for submitters. And oftentimes, I think HBR still sort of opens the door for a proposal for an article. It's like, this is great. I mean, don't you wish ISR and MISQ editors would do the same thing, that just send us a proposal for an article and we'll tell you what we think, right? It's like, that would be so nice, right? So yeah, so take advantage of that. You try that, you submit something, you see what they say. And if they don't like it, you write another one. You might wait a couple of weeks and submit it again. And just keep seeing what they say. Oftentimes they'll say, like, we don't publish papers on this topic. And, I would say, maybe you haven't made your topic clear, or you haven't made clear how your topic relates to the things that they do publish, right? So the next time you submit, you'd say, this is in response to the article, these 3 articles that you just published, right? So anyway, so you have to dig at it, just like you do for anything else, right? Okay. Is there a ranking for practitioner outlets? And if so, does it matter? I'd say yes and yes, with qualifications. Like, is there a ranking? I'm unable to find a real ranking, but in the rankings of academic journals, you will find practitioner journals included. So HBR is at the top. SMR is California Management Review would probably be across business schools, second. Sloan Management Review, third. Communications of the ACM, someplace over on the IT lists. Academic, Academy of Management Executive used to be a kind of a bridging things, someplace over on the management side. But so that's an academic ranking of practitioner journals. Not a bad start, right? The other way to understand what the ranking is to ask your dean or your department chair, what do you think is the ranking? And that would be kind of a contextual ranking within our field. The other thing to do would be to ask the practitioners that, what is their view of the ranking? Interestingly enough, they will combine outlets that have articles by academics in them with outlets that I would consider almost purely journalism. They rely on journalists a lot for their outlets. They rely on commercial outlets like Gartner and Forrester. Those are commercial outlets. Those people are doing research for money, right? They rely on those people for data, to understand data, to collect data and expose it to them. And then they read The Economist and general, Time Magazine and Newsweek, and back in the old day, or maybe Life, I don't know. But yeah, so there are rankings, and do they matter? Yes. And I think the way in which they matter is that if your dean is not aware of them, then that matters. If your dean has an ill-informed opinion, then that matters. It's like, yes, it matters, right? If they're not aware of MISQ executive, then they're just not aware of it. And you can try and make them aware of it, but if they're not aware of it, they're not aware of it. That's, so it does matter. Always matters. Questions? Any questions? Follow-up questions? You're such a quiet group. Okay. Main differences in focus and framing between research and practitioner outlets. I think you understand that now, right? Different motivations, different so what's, same idea, right? And also the so what's are different and the motivation is different, right? Job market potential. Yes. Yeah. I think in Europe in particular, and also in the US these days, the people that make hiring decisions are way more interested in being relevant and showing that their faculties are relevant. Do you agree? You agree? Okay. And so I think that relevance matters, and especially if you can pair academic research and practitioner publications together. I did research on this topic, and from this I published one MISQ paper, and I published an article in Sloan Management Review for practitioners, which demonstrates the relevance. It just proves the relevance. Not the best proof, but nevertheless proves the relevance of the research, right? It's if you're a more technical person, having a patent would have the same sort of cachet. So, and deans are increasingly feel obligated. They're feeling the pressure to be relevant, especially in public institutions where the public is paying for the research and the research should be benefiting society. To show how that research benefits society is really important. They have trouble counting these things, but they're looking for ways to count it, and I think it's important. Okay, what kind of work do practitioner outlets publish? Okay, this one should be easy. Work that is part of a conversation among practitioners, right? That addresses a problem that practitioners are activated about or interested in or are trying to deal with. That provides a novel, interesting, easily, or not easily understood, it doesn't have to be easily understood, but understandable idea, the aha, right? And validates the value of the aha by providing the so what, right? That's what they're interested in publishing. So good question here, follow-up question to that one. How to approach them, the journals, as they may not be interested in someone new. Oh, okay, Anne-Catherine.
Oh, please
go
just
ahead.
go ahead with your answer to that question. I'll ask mine afterwards.
Okay. So how to approach them? You're right. If they don't know you, they never heard of you, they don't know who you are. So you do have to explain to them, but this would be in a cover letter or in a proposal letter that goes to them, depending upon how they operate, right? If they take proposals, you would send and say, I have this work, I have this idea, I think it's relevant to this problem, this is the kind of changes that I think managers should make, right? Very briefly. And you would explain how you came about this idea or what data you have to support it. You know, I did field research at 17 sites over 4 years. And, you know, that's the basis for my research. So you're trying to explain to them why they should respect you as an authority that should be listened to by their readers, right? Why their readers should listen to you, right? And you'll have to send them, you can attach your whole CV if you think that. Well, I think a summary of your critical strengths would probably be better. You know, I worked in industry for 20 years. That was part of my pitch. Your credentials and where you got your PhD and where you have published in academia. They do know those journals, and the quality of your data and your analysis, and why you're trying to explain to them why they should believe you, right? Why they should trust you to advise their readers, right? And if they don't get it, if they say, no, we're looking for people with better training, then you go, okay, I didn't do the training part very well. This is like an iterative process, right? But you have an advantage over consultants. You're seen to be less biased by your own interests. You're not selling anything. You're poor. You're not making consulting wages, but you have kind of an advantage in the believability of your findings, and they believe you to be a stronger advocate for the truth than just a publication, right? They believe that you care what you find, right? So that's an advantage, right? Okay, Anne-Catherine, did you still have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Dr. Beath. I just wondered if those outlets like to publish specific methods more than others. For instance, I had the impression that a lot of those practitioner outlets have many qualitative data, mainly interview data that I saw throughout what I just read. There was not so much quantitative data. Maybe this is because there is no real research model in the way that we know it from, you know, academic outlets that are really focused on academics. What is your take on that?
So you remember, so keep in mind that the practitioner reader has a mapping problem, right? From an academic standpoint, we're trying to collect data to establish generalizability of an idea, right? Whereas a practitioner's perspective is, how does that idea apply to me? How can I map myself to that idea, right? That's why you see so much qualitative work presented. So, or the ideas are presented in a qualitative fashion, so that you can understand, oh yeah, there are managers, they're like me. There's somebody running a medium-sized company or a big company or a little company that is or is not like me. There's somebody operating in an industry that is, I can tell you, is a little like my industry, but not like my industry in some ways. And so I can sort of begin to say, oh yeah, I understand how this is relevant to me, right? Me personally, right? So that's why you see so much qualitative, because they're trying to be descriptive and to aid the person in mapping, right? But behind those descriptions, you will often find statistics like, this is like 80% of people doing this, and this is, this explains 90% of, well, they don't always say it that way, but they will tell you that we have the data, the survey data or other kinds of data, to demonstrate that this is a real thing and a real problem, and that this effect is high. You'll see, if you read between the lines, you'll see all of that, right? It strengthens the idea, right? So if you're doing a mixed methods kind of, so I mean, when I was listening, I listened to Erin's talk last week. When I was listening to Erin's talk, I was, this is a habit that I have, right? I was trying to think about what the practice implications were of what he was talking about. So he was, for those of you who were there, he was talking about ways in which open source software teams operate, right? And you might think this is only relevant to open source software teams, but I thought that there was probably relevance to other teams, But so this is the kind of this is kind of the problem that you have with your aha, right? So, but that is why you see the mapping problem, is why you see so much qualitative research. And a strong way to help with the mapping is to marry an in-depth description of your idea, which is like a case study or an example of it, and with actually other small examples, and you'll see this sometimes in an article, with small examples from the press or from public data, or from your own research, small examples of similar kinds of things in other contexts. You can see how this strengthens the ability of the reader to say, oh yeah, this isn't just happening in manufacturing, it's also happening in service organizations, right? So yeah, and these days, as Erin said last week, these days people get qualitative data from way more than just interviews. They get data from quarterly financial presentations. They get them from blogs. They get, it's like, I thought that was really a highlight of his present, that they got data from so many different sources, right? They got qualitative data from so many different sources. So, and okay, so your observation's right, Thomas, and then Oliver.
Yeah, Oliver, you first. I think I already raised so many questions that you should go first.
Okay.
Sure. All right. Thank you very much. I just had a quick question, maybe also in the interest of a few of the younger scholars here. Are there any topics by any chance that you find that practitioner outlets are currently looking for, or that are very hot right now, that are that they're desperately looking for research on?
AI.
Okay.
Generative AI. If you have anything on generative AI, you should be in touch with one of these editors, right? Yeah. Sorry, I went. How do I go back? Go back. Okay. Yeah. AI.
Cool.
I don't know if any of you went to ISIS this year, but at ISIS there were like 3 or 4 practitioner panels, and no matter what the title was, they were all about AI. And people are really struggling with this, and it has huge. I mean, if you think about it from a practice standpoint, it requires different ways of funding. It requires different kinds of metrics. It requires different kinds of ways of developing applications, or it really does upset the practice basket, right? It requires people with new skills. It requires rare skills on top of that. It requires increasingly improved skills on the part of everyone who's using the technology. You know, it's like, if you think about a company being kind of a set of existing practices, AI throws a monkey wrench into that whole thing, right? So you can, that to me, I would argue that that's why they're so excited about it, is because it implies so many changes, and they're trying to decide when to jump, where to jump, how to experiment, when to invest big. Those are the kinds of things that they're asking about, right? You can, I mean, I think that, you know, reading the Financial Times, reading the New York Times, reading the Washington Post business sections, you get a feel for what the issues are that people are trying to decide, trying to understand, and the kinds of decisions they're trying to make. And most of those decisions are decisions about changing practices, right? Thomas.
Yeah, I don't also like, if you have more slides, we can also continue with your presentation.
No,
So then...
no, I'm actually okay. I have a couple more questions that I'm going to, and then I have slides with advice, but I'm happy to just answer questions. So,
yeah, then just do your questions first, so the others can raise their questions as well. I don't want to hijack the sessions here for my Q&A session. So
that's right. I appreciate the conversation, Thomas. Okay, I would like tips on how to choose an outlet. And here my answer is, it's just the same as choosing a research outlet, right? What does my current or prospective dean or department chair want from me, right? What do they want? What do the different research outlets, I mean, what do the different practitioner outlets publish? You know, what kinds of conversations are they having? So this is the same thing. Like, there used to be the sense that ISR only published OR kinds of things, you know, and they're trying very hard not to do just that today. So I would say, if you're not doing OR, instead of avoiding ISR, you should be submitting there, right? There used to be this feeling that MISQ only published qualitative work. They're trying really hard not to be that, right? So I would say you have to understand the outlets and understand how your work fits in, and you have to understand what is being asked of you, right? Thomas, do you have conversations with your department chair about what they are expecting from you when they evaluate your performance?
So I think the only smart sentences that I heard about deans is that they can't read, but they can count, right? So I think that summarizes it quite well. And I think, so I'm at a computer science faculty, which means they don't care about our outcomes, but I think it's a different game for business school, right? So
do you think, have you talked to your dean about whether relevance is important to them? But they, you know, there you have a different, they expect you to create things that are adopted by technology companies, and they probably value patents more than.
Yeah, exactly.
HBR.
But if I understood computer science correctly, it's more like you develop a new algorithm, and then that new algorithm is faster than the older ones, and that counts. And if I come around as an IS person with MSQ and theory and so on, they think of a weird person that does weird things. So I think it's a little bit depending on where you are located in your university.
So if you develop an algorithm, are you expected to have that algorithm adopted by companies?
Yeah. And also published, right? ACM and so on. And there are these computer science outlets. Yeah. I think they also publish a lot on conferences, but I think I would consider myself more as an IS person. So the usual conferences and publication supply. Yeah.
Okay. So you understand how to choose outlets, right? Okay. So one question that I get often hired is like, should I hire an editor to dumb down the language? Right? And the answer is no. As I said before, first of all, they have editors that will make you crazy dumbing down your language. But second of all, the important thing is to read their literature and understand before you start writing what their language is and how do they talk about this. You know, what terms do they use? Do they say AI application, or do they say the AI? It's like you have to understand what they're how their editors think by reading their articles, right? And you need to use your familiarity with their practices. I mean, not the journal's practice, but managers' practices in order to really do a good job of the so what, right? Okay. So people often say, my field research was carried out in China. Will HBR publish it? And I can say, yes, they will. I can point you to articles where the field research was done in China and it got published in HBR because, first of all, there was a great and controversial aha, right? So it was an aha that was contradictory and novel, and a great so what, really a great section on what this means for you. And that's the biggest, if the data was collected in China, you're going to have trouble mapping your situation to the Chinese. I don't know what managing is like in China. I know what managing is like here, but a great so what section really helps you understand what the implications of this research are for your company, right? So that's it. Okay, so those are the questions I had here. Okay, so now I have a whole bunch of advice slides, but does anybody else have any questions? Oh, there's something in the chat. Ollie, what do we got in the chat?
No further questions. Just
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Something was interesting. What a pleasure. Okay. Anybody want to? Redirect.
The laughing smiley.
Anything else that anybody wants to? Okay. All right, and I'm good. If we don't get through all of these slides, I am going to send them to you, and most of them are very self-evident. You will understand all of them, I'm sure. Okay, so we'll go on. Get my clicker. Okay, these are 3 slides. These are 3 slides that are just general good practice in your career as a researcher, whether you're writing for academics or for practitioners. First of all, use outlines. You remember the Ouroboros? Start with the bones of the, write yourself an abstract on the academic side or an executive summary on the practitioner side that identifies the bones. What is the problem? How is this viewed? What is my idea? What kind of so what are we talking about here, right? Then on either side, especially with practitioners, create a slide deck, one slide for each bone, and sit with a practitioner. I don't care if it's your brother-in-law, your sister-in-law, your grandfather, your father, your mother, your grandmother. Sit with somebody and go through your deck and watch their face and see what they think and ask them, what do they understand? What do they think the implications would be for them? Stuff like that. So use a slide deck to kind of present the idea in general, right? Then third piece of advice, develop your tables and figures first. I'll say later that every practitioner article should have one great figure. And developing that figure first allows you to write to it and to think about what is the essence of what I am trying to express here. What is the key idea I'm trying to get across? Like light bulb up that guy's butt, right? So develop your tables and figures first and then write to those. Outline what you have written periodically. You don't just outline and then write. You go back, you throw away the old outline, you write a new outline. What have I written? Oh, that makes no sense at all. Okay, I got to change this stuff. And then use presentations to refine your logic. Find a group of practitioners, maybe at the place where you collected your data or 2 or 3 places. Ask them if they would sit through a 15-minute presentation on what you think your findings are and an article that you're developing for a practitioner outlet, and ask them to give you feedback on that, right? So, is that clear? Questions? Yeah, okay, clear, thank you. Okay, all right. Okay, look forward and reason back, right? This is a good life rule in general, right? Just always look forward and reason back. This is a skill, right? So what I mean by that in academic or practitioner article, think about what you're going to write at the end, and then make sure that your motivation is linked to that. Make sure that your little black man is related to your little gray man, right? So one of the things that people do, maybe you don't, but a lot of people do, is the motivation with which they start their article is the motivation with which they started their research project, right? The motivation for your research project is not the motivation for your article 90% of the time. The article is bursting into a conversation about something. And so the motivation for your article needs to burst into that conversation, right? This on either side. Just make sure that the motivation, the little gray man and the little black man, are closely related, right? Write for a specific outlet and its readers and editors, right? Whether it's ISR or HBR, understand who those people are, the readers, understand who the editors are, and write for them, right? Expect reviewers to be human. Subhuman, maybe, but at least human. Don't follow reviewer editor advice slavishly. I can't say this enough times. They don't know your work like you do. They don't know what you're trying to do like you do. Stick to your guns, fight them. Always, always, always revise and submit. If somebody gives you, leaves the door open this much for revision, you should take it. And then celebrate every submission. When I was a department chair, we had a rule that whoever submitted anything had to take everyone else out for lunch, right? To celebrate submissions. That way we got more lunches, but we got a lot more celebrations and people really felt grateful, right? So celebrate your submissions. It's the only thing you can control is your submissions, right? Okay. This is, whoops. All right, 3. Get feedback, right? Get feedback systematically and frequently. Academia, it's easy. You have research seminars, you have colleagues that do research. Practitioner side, it's a little harder, but you have to develop a few friends on the practitioner side that will look at your executive summary and look at your slide deck and look at drafts and help you, give you feedback. And so the more of those people that you develop, the more you will learn how to write good so what sections, right? Those people are key to your education for publishing in the world of practice, right? And have a feedback plan like this. Always know what it is you want to know at what point, right? Are you still just trying to work out the presentation of the idea? Make sure you tell people that, right? Because they'll get stuck on the motivation. Almost everybody reads the first page and then goes, right? So make clear you have a feedback plan, tell people what you want. Okay, all right. Okay, so this is advice specifically for practitioner articles. Does anybody have any questions at this time? Okay. So I think it's useful to pick an imaginary reader, like a CIO or a CEO, and write to that individual. If you know someone who is a CSO or the lead AI research, the lead AI developer in an organization, think about that person and try to write to that person. Think about how you talk to that person, how you express yourself to that person, what their issues are, and what levers they have at their disposal to make changes, right? So you want to end up with concrete, actionable lessons for that individual, not just conceptual things, but active. Yeah. Keep in mind that they have to map their problem to yours. You may find that when you're talking to them about your article, you need to help them with this. You know, you're a service company, this is a manufacturing company, but actually their IT department is almost exactly like yours, right? Their IT department has almost exactly the same problems that yours does, right? And then, so with as I said before about I think I already said this earlier about looking forward and reasoning back. Think seriously about the ending of the paper, what you're going to advise, and make sure your motivation points to that. Make sure your little black man and your little gray man are very much in parallel. Questions? Oh, you're so quiet. Okay.
I would hardly jump in here with a question. I wondered, you just noted on the other slide, like articles stop here, but writing starts here for practitioner outlets. I have, yes, there's the last bullet point. I have a question relating to the interrelatedness of academic and practitioner articles. Sometimes I see practitioner outlets publishing work that is directly related to an academic publication. So for instance, people publish in, you name it, MSQ, ISR, whatever, and then they do a practitioner article directly on this topic, and they try to translate what they found from the academic outlet to the practitioner audience. Does that happen often in your experience? Is that recommended to do so? Or would you say rather write a known article for that outlet and do not try to build upon academic outlet?
No, absolutely. If I haven't made it clear, I will make the light bulb part of, the core idea in your research article and the core idea in your practitioner article are often very similar. Mm-hmm. It's just the framing that is different. It's for a different audience, right? Yeah. So actually, what you may find that is on the academic side, the conversation is about transaction costs. I'm sorry, this is very old thinking, but an economic concept like transaction costs. But actually what the implications is about what kinds of resources you internalize and what kinds of resources you take outside, right? On the practitioner article, you don't need to mention the concept of transaction costs at all, because they are already concerned about what resources they should be doing internally and where they should be using external resources, right? So the framing is different. The core idea that one of the things that you should be concerned about when you are making decisions about what to externalize and what to internalize is your ability to control that, or your need to control that work, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same concept. It's the same core idea, but presented in a different frame. Does that make sense? So,
it does, absolutely.
And I often see people trying to. I mean, there are many articles that have gone through my hands that have been essentially originally a research article, and that they want to present the idea in a practitioner audience. And one of the biggest problems is that they don't understand what the implications of that work are, or for whom they are implications. So, or the implications that they start with in the early drafts are like implications for the board of directors, for the CEO, for the head of IT, for project leaders, and for programmers, right? It's like that's a big agenda. It's like that, just from a practical standpoint, that agenda needs to be narrowed to the place where you have the best advice, right? Maybe the head of security, or the chief technology officer, or the CIO, or that sort of leads. So you want to redirect the implications for that person. So, but absolutely, the core ideas are often the same. Does that answer your question or not?
Yes, it does. So it's absolutely fine to publish 2 articles on the same topic, one in an academic or research-focused outlet, I would call it, and then one in a practitioner-focused outlet.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you're making 2 different contributions, right? Those are 2 very different contributions. One is a contribution to research, the other is a contribution to practice. Those are 2 very different contributions.
All right, thank you.
And what makes an article different from another article is not the method section or even the literature review. What makes a difference is the contribution. That's what has to be different. Okay. All right. Get feedback. We talked about that, didn't we? Oh, did I go backwards? I'm going forwards. Sorry. Okay. I did that one. Okay. One great figure. I said this earlier. One great figure that captures the essence of the article. This is such important. It's like, it can be all different kinds of, a bigger frame, the process, it can be like a 3x3 table. I have one article that has the big figure is a 3x3 table, and it's like 3 different circumstances, 3 different solutions, right? And it's just, but it captures it's a way of presenting the essence of the article in a different frame, helps the reader comprehend what you're saying in a different way, right? All different kinds of, if you look through HBR and Sloan Management Review, you'll get a million ideas for what these figures can look like, right? But they're just one great PowerPoint slide. Right? So, okay. Specifically for practitioners, this is about writing. So your theory and your methods may be very important to reviewers, right? Sloan Management Review sends its papers out to people like me to review and other academics, as well as practitioners. So, and I do want to see that someone writing an article for Sloan Management Review is using theory correctly and using good theory and using good methods, right? So I look for I look for indications of the theory that's leading their idea in the footnotes, for example, and I look for an appendix on the methods. Now, when you submit the paper, you need more of this for the reviewers than is going to appear in the published article. So when you look at the published article, it may have only a few footnotes and no methodology section at all, or it might have a short appendix on where the data came from in MISQE, for example. But when you submit it, the reviewers need to know how good your methods are and how good your data is. So if you're proud of your methods and your data, include them in a short appendix to essentially the meat of the article, right? Then this is something I said before, that your competitive advantage over consultants is really the rigor of your education, the rigor of your methods, and the unbiasedness of your search for knowledge, right? So be sure and let that peep through, right? So make sure that the reader understands that you're an academic. Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, I would maybe try to challenge you here a little bit, because 20 minutes ago you said something pretty smart about like journalists, right? And I think there are different practitioner outlets. Like I think SMR and HBR are always like theory-based. But you also mentioned, for example, The Economist, and I guess that's only journalists that work there. And I wonder, because I think what differentiates us between journalists, as far as I've got it, is the theory and the method part, right? And I guess for the practitioner part, for the theory part, it's very important for a theory paper, but for the practitioner part, it becomes a little bit a legacy, because at least for me, it feels very like, well, it's hard to detach yourself from the theory and from the method and to think about what you mentioned, practice implications and so on, right? So it becomes kind of a burden in a way. Yeah. So would it then mean that we maybe should more adopt a journalist mindset than rather the academic?
Actually, I think my point on the first point is that the theory should not be part of the text, right?
Yeah.
That there is a theory about this should not be a part of the text. That is irrelevant to the practitioners, right? But the fact that there is a theory, that there is a theoretical concept here, or there's theory, should be something that reviewers can find in the article, right? So put it in footnotes, put it in an appendix, right? And only for the review version, right? It's going to disappear by the time the paper is published, but that's it. So my understanding is that The Economist publishes op-eds by academics. And I actually don't know that for a fact, and I don't read The Economist anymore. So somebody could correct me, but I believe they publish op-eds by non-house writers, right? But like, for example, the Financial Times publishes op-eds by, that I do know, they publish op-eds by researchers. And the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, they all are also good outlets. And actually, those are as good a warrant on the relevance of your research as anything. You know, if you can convince the editorial staff at Wall Street Journal that your work is important, your dean will be convinced.
True. That is true.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I
you know,
just
if you
wonder if it becomes a burden, right? Because this kind of mindset which you are trained as an academic, that theory is important and methods are important, well, becomes a problem when you write the practitioner article because you think of it in a different way than a journalist would.
actually, yeah, this is so interesting. Does it become a burden? I don't think so. But you know, my interest, for me, it doesn't become a burden. For me, it becomes like a tool, right?
Okay.
It's a tool for thinking. It's a way of parsing what I look at, right?
Okay.
So for me, the theory is an abstraction that I apply in a different context, right? So for me, it's a very useful tool. It doesn't mean that I have to tell the manager that I'm talking to that there's two ways of thinking about a sourcing decision. One is like, how are you going to control it? And the other is, can you even get access to these capabilities otherwise, right? Those are basically two different theories. One's transaction costs and one's resource dependence, right? But there are ways of saying there's two ways to think about this, right? So for me, the theory is a tool that shapes how I see the world, right? Okay, so I have to tell you that somebody's going to have to tell me, wait a minute, what time it is. It's 9:20. Okay, I got 10 minutes left.
10 more minutes, exactly.
Okay, I don't pay attention to time. I actually have a watch. This is one of the nice things about being retired. I have a watch, but it's completely wooden. And the little, I can just set the time to whatever time I want. The hands just roll around, right? Okay. Okay, don't hide the scope of your sample. That's the mapping problem, right? I said this earlier too. Flesh out your research with examples from the public, from the other sources, to make the context, to help you bring in more readers from different contexts to your example. That's why these days we include examples from European as well and South American and companies so that people feel like they can fit into the example better. Anne-Catherine.
Yes, thank you. I just wondered if citation practices differ between academic and practitioner outlets. So if I'm writing a practitioner article, do I need to cite only practitioner articles? Do I have to cite practitioner and academic articles? Do I cite anything? I don't know. I've never written a practitioner article, so I just wondered how that works.
Yeah, actually, you would see more citations to articles in SMR and HBR in SMR and HBR articles. But you would expect to see more citations in what you submit the first time than in what is published. So if you go to HBR and you look at, and they'll just have like 2 or 3 references, right? Maybe to my last article on this topic and maybe one other, but that's not what the submission, so feel free to use citations. But whether or not there is so I would include my key theoretical concept pieces in there for reviewers, right? But that's not in the body, right? So, so for the most part, the biggest difference between citations in ISR and citations in HBR is that citations in ISR are meant to indicate to the reader who knows the code that this idea is expanded on or comes from this source. It's to recognize the relationship between ideas. On the other hand, in practitioner articles, the purpose of the citation is to give the reader a way into more in-depth reading about a topic. And so in ISR, the citation will just have the citation because we all know the language. We don't need to say, this idea is described in this paper, right? In MISQE, for example, you'll see that they do a really good job of this. Every single footnote will say, to read more about this concept or to see a good example of this concept, see this thing. So it's really, they're very clearly identified as pointers for the readers, not to substantiate the authority of the writer, but to assist the reader and learning more, right? And SMR and HBR don't expect you to know this, but they will they will ask you to put some, or they'll just remove your citations if they don't find them useful to the reader, right? They're useful to the reviewer. So they think of it as two separate processes. One is finding something to publish and getting it right, and the other is publishing it. Those are two different jobs, right? So, okay. One more thing. I think there's more here. Let me see. Okay. This goes back to the project. Okay, I'm almost out of time, right? Okay. Be willing to be surprised. That would be my number one advice. Number two advice would be do most what you enjoy most. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be as happy a person today as I am. But I have always done what I enjoyed the most. So, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. I will send you these. I'll send these slides to both of you.
Yes,
feel free
gladly.
to email me. Feel free to email me if you have other questions. Be sure to come up and talk to me. I actually was planning to go to ISIS, but I am not going to go now because I have to be someplace else for a meeting. But I'll see you at ISIS in Bangkok, if not before.
Perfect. I think that's a great end to your knowledge
Does
sharing
anybody
part.
have any questions?
Exactly. I'll quit with the recording, and now we have a bit of time off the record for the
yes,
for free questions for this.